I continue to see comments from coaches that say things such as, you cannot train skills in live situations. My response would be, if it's not in a live situation, you're not training a skill. So in particular, I saw some comments about shooting, and how you have to do, shoot by yourself in a gym, nobody around, in order to improve as a shooter. And that's well and good, and it might be part of the process. But again, you look at the way players shoot in practice, and you look at the way they shoot in games, and there's a huge discrepancy in terms of shooting percentages. So I know with one player in particular that I tracked would shoot 70+% on our practice shots, and then in games was shooting 30 to 40%. And that went, we were shooting all kinds of shots, variety of shots, off the dribble, off the catch, fades to the basket, the typical game shot, game speed, game spots type of practice. And 30 to 40% decrement in performance during games. And people think that's normal. That's just game slippage. That's why you practice, because you're going to shoot 20, 30, 40% worse than what you do in practice in games. So you have to shoot a high percentage in practice in order to have that game slippage and still shoot a decent percentage in games. And I don't understand why we accept that as the norm. Why do we accept exceptional shooting in practice and non-exceptional shooting in games as the result? Obviously, the shooting percentages aren't transferring when there's such a decrement in performance. Now, there are some performance-related variables that certainly play a factor. Defense, fatigue, and especially shot selection. I think, and I've worked with a player who improved her shooting percentages 20 to 30% based on two factors. She improved her confidence with a new coach, and she took better shots. She did nothing to her shooting technique. So, I think shot selection is one thing that's overlooked when we look at shooting percentages in games versus practice. However, if we're assuming that the players are taking decent shots during games, and we're still having that same decrement of performance, the question is why? And why do we accept that? Why is that considered the norm? And again, I think it goes back to this idea that to practice a skill, we have to practice on our own with no defense, no other players on the court. But then in games, we have to perform in a situation where there's defensive players and there's other players on the court. So we're not practicing the same thing that we're having to perform in a game. And I think we really underestimate the effect of the decision to shoot on shooting percentages. So if a player has taken 2 shots in a row during a game and missed those 2 shots, what are the chances that they want to shoot the next time? They're unlikely to take that shot, and if left open and forced to take that shot, I think they're going to shoot a lesser percentage because they're not stepping in with confidence. That decision to shoot, the hesitancy to take too many shots because they don't want to be a ball hog or because they've taken a couple shots in a row. I think these are factors that affect shooting. Similarly, in practice, when you hit 2 or 3 shots in a row and you're shooting, let's say a shot of 6, 7, 8, 9 shots in a series, you start to gain that confidence. And it probably inflates your shooting percentage because you're shooting back to back, you're feeling the rhythm, you're feeling the confidence. And again, these are things that coaches will say are important to developing a shooter. They have to feel that rhythm, they have to feel that confidence. And that may be true. However, in a game, you don't have that same type of rhythm and that same type of confidence because you're constantly moving from shooting to playing defense to dribbling to passing to playing defense again to taking another shot. And, unless you're somebody like Kobe Bryant who's taking 30 shots a game, you're probably not taking a shot every minute, every 2 minutes, every 3 minutes. If you figure in a high school game, an average, kind of star type player is going to take maybe 15 shots in a game. They're probably going to play 28 to 30 minutes a game. You're talking about 1 shot every 2 minutes, that they're taking. Versus a drill where you might take 25, 30, 50 shots in 2 to 3 minutes. That's a whole different environment of practice and a different feeling in terms of that rhythm and the confidence when you're shooting in a game, when you're just coming off a hard defensive possession versus a practice situation where you're, right into your shot 2, 3, 4, 5 times in a row, no hesitation, no thinking, etc. And so these factors that happen in a game, and we know are part of the game, that don't occur in the practices, I think that's one of the reasons why there's a decrement, shooting decrement between practice percentages and game percentages. But as coaches, we don't want to acknowledge these differences. We want to stick to what we've always done, which is isolated block practice, go make 10 shots in a row, go shoot from the elbow, 10 shots, then switch with your partner. This is how we've always practiced shooting and how we think of shooting practice, even though we know that it's going to lead to these shooting decrements. So what's the risk in shooting a little lower percentage in practice, or shooting a few fewer repetitions in practice, but having that be more quality practice and more game-like practice because you have choices involved, you have defense involved, so on and so forth. If you already know that you're going to shoot 70% in practice and you're going to shoot 30% in game, what's the risk? Players, very few players are great shooters at the high school level. Is that because they're immature? Is it because they don't practice enough? Or is it because it's the type of practice? It's probably all three. It depends on the player. But if we continue to practice in the same way, we have the same practice results and we have the same game results, what's stopping us from changing that practice? Let's start with taking 50% of the practice reps that are now spent in isolated block practice and make those into more game-like repetitions where there's a choice, a decision to shoot, and then there's a defensive player involved. And then see, yes, shooting percentages in practice are going to go down. You're not going to shoot 70% when you're having to make that decision, when you're having to determine with a defensive player, when you're not shooting multiple shots back to back to back. But maybe practice or game results will actually improve. So what's better, to have these inflated practice percentages with poor game performances, or to have slightly worse practice percentages with improved game performance? To me, the point of practice is to improve game performance. And if we're not improving game performance, if we're having 40% decrements between practice and games, there's a problem with the practice.